The crystal chandeliers of the Romano estate cast 1,000 fractured rainbows across the marble ballroom floor. 300 of Italy's most powerful figures stood frozen, champagne flutes suspended mid-toast, as Ruggiero Falcone reached into the velvet-lined box presented by his lieutenant. The antique silver scissors gleamed beneath the lights. His wife, Ginevra, stood beside him in an emerald gown that matched the depth of her hazel eyes. Her long chestnut hair cascaded down her back like dark honey, the same hair he had once called his favorite thing about her. Across the room, Bianca Sartori smiled. The scissors opened, then closed. A thick lock of Ginevra's hair fell to the floor like a wounded bird. Ruggiero handed it to his mistress as though presenting a trophy. No one breathed. Ginevra didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply knelt, gathered the strands of her own hair from the cold marble, and rose with a grace that made every woman in that room straighten her spine. She looked into her husband's steel-gray eyes one final time. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finally setting me free." And then she walked out of the ballroom, out of the estate, and out of the life she had spent 12 years building beside a man who had just revealed exactly who he had always been. No one in that room understood what had just happened. But within 6 months, they would. Because the woman Ruggiero Falcone had just humiliated wasn't destroying him. She had simply stopped protecting him. Before we begin, thank you for spending part of your day with me. Whether you're listening from home, at work, while traveling, or relaxing before bed, I'm truly grateful you're here. Tonight's story is about betrayal, quiet strength, redemption, and discovering that true power belongs to those who never need to raise their voice. Please like, share, and subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from so I can see just how far across the world this story has reached. Now, let's begin today's unforgettable story. Earlier that evening, Ginevra had stood before her vanity mirror, carefully threading diamond earrings through her lobes. The reflection staring back at her looked exactly like the woman she had always been expected to be. Elegant, composed, the perfect wife of one of Italy's most feared mob bosses. But behind those calm hazel eyes lived a woman who had been slowly suffocating for 3 years. She knew about Bianca. Of course she knew. A wife always knows. The late nights that smelled of different perfume. The phone calls taken in other rooms. The way his steel-gray eyes had stopped seeing her years ago. Stopped really seeing her. The way he had when they'd first met at her father's vineyard in Tuscany. She had been 21 then. He had been 29, already building the empire that would make the Falcone name synonymous with power across southern Europe. She remembered the way he'd looked at her that summer afternoon, his rolled sleeves revealing the fresh tattoo on his right forearm, a crowned Roman lion that symbolized everything he intended to become. "You're different," he had told her, his voice carrying the gravel of a man who had already seen too much violence. "You look at me like I'm still human." She had loved him for that vulnerability. She had married him believing she could protect the human part of him from the monster his world demanded he become. For 9 years she had succeeded. Then Bianca Sartori walked into their lives. Ginevra finished clasping her necklace. A gift from Ruggiero's mother, Luciana, who had pressed it into her hands on their wedding day with tears in her wise old eyes. "Guard his heart," Luciana had whispered. "He doesn't know how to guard it himself." Tonight was their 12th wedding anniversary. Ruggiero had insisted on the grand celebration, inviting every powerful family in Italy to witness what he called the strength of the Falcone legacy. Ginevra knew better. This party wasn't about their marriage. It was about performance, power, the image of a united family that would make his rivals think twice before challenging him. She was a prop. She had made peace with that years ago. What she hadn't made peace with was the way Bianca would be there tonight, wearing a gown that cost more than most families earned in a year, smiling at Ginevra with the particular cruelty of a woman who believed she had already won. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Signora Falcone?" Ginevra turned to find Rosa, her personal maid for the past 8 years, standing in the doorway with worried eyes. "The guests are arriving. Don Falcone requests your presence in the main foyer." Ginevra smoothed the emerald silk of her gown. "Tell my husband I'll be down in a moment." Rosa hesitated. "Signora, That woman is already here. She arrived early. She's standing beside him now, greeting the guests. The words landed like stones in still water. Ginevra's reflection didn't flinch. She had learned long ago how to keep her face perfectly still while her heart cracked along familiar fault lines. "Thank you, Rosa." When she descended the grand staircase 20 minutes later, she saw them immediately. Ruggiero stood at the entrance of the ballroom, towering at 6'4", his broad shoulders filling out his tailored black suit with the kind of effortless authority that made lesser men step aside. His jet-black hair was slicked back impeccably, and when he turned his head to laugh at something one of his captains said, she could see the Italian script tattooed on his neck, just visible above his collar. "Il potere senza amore è vuoto." Power without love is empty. The irony of those words had stopped being painful years ago. Now they simply felt like evidence of the man he had once hoped to become, and the man he had failed to remain. Bianca stood close enough that her arm brushed his with every gesture. Her blonde hair caught the light like spun gold, and her blue eyes sparkled with the particular triumph of a woman who believed proximity to power made her powerful. She was beautiful. Ginevra had never denied that. But as she watched Bianca lean close to whisper something in Ruggiero's ear, watched her husband smile in a way he hadn't smiled at his own wife in years, she felt something shift in her chest. Not jealousy. She had burned through jealousy long ago. This was something quieter, something final. Resignation. Massimo Conti appeared at her elbow, his scarred eyebrow raising slightly as he followed her gaze. Ruggiero's right-hand man had been with the family for 20 years, and he was one of the few people in this world who had never treated Ginevra like an ornament. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "I can make your excuses. Say you're unwell." Ginevra smiled, and the warmth in it made Massimo's weathered face soften with something like grief. "I've never run from anything in my life, Massimo. I'm not going to start tonight." She descended the final steps, and as if sensing her presence, Ruggiero turned. For just a moment, half a heartbeat, something flickered in those steel-gray eyes, something that might have been guilt or longing, or the fading echo of the man who had once looked at her like she was the only real thing in his world. Then it was gone. "My wife," he announced to the gathered guests, his voice carrying across the marble foyer. "The jewel of the Falcone family." Bianca's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Ginevra crossed to her husband's side, and when he pressed a perfunctory kiss to her cheek, she caught the scent of Bianca's perfume already clinging to his collar. "Happy anniversary," she said softly. He didn't respond. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of champagne, forced smiles, and conversations that required nothing of her, except the ability to look beautiful and agree with whatever her husband said. She played her role perfectly. She always had. It was nearly 11 when Ruggiero clinked his champagne glass, calling for silence. The string quartet stopped playing. 300 faces turned toward the raised platform where he stood, his tattooed knuckles wrapped around the crystal flute. Honor et lilt spelled across his fingers in faded ink. "Honor and loyalty. Tonight," he began, his voice filling the ballroom with the easy command of a man who had never been questioned. "We celebrate 12 years of the Falcone legacy. 12 years of building an empire. 12 years of alliances, victories, and the kind of power that makes our enemies tremble." He paused for effect, and the guests murmured their approval. "But tonight, I want to honor someone who has been essential to that legacy. Someone whose loyalty, whose beauty, whose presence has been invaluable." Ginevra felt the weight of 300 gazes settle on her shoulders. She straightened her spine, prepared her gracious smile. Then Ruggiero extended his hand. Not toward her, but toward someone in the crowd. Bianca Sartori stepped forward, her blue eyes shimmering with barely concealed delight. The murmurs shifted, became uncertain, confused. Ginevra's smile didn't waver. She had trained it too well for that. But inside, something began to crack. "For 3 years," Ruggiero continued, "Bianca has been my closest advisor, my confidant, my—" He paused, and the word hung in the air like a blade. "My inspiration." Across the room, Luciana Falcone pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Massimo Conti's jaw tightened until the scar across his eyebrow went white. And Ginevra simply stood there, still as marble, watching the man she had loved for 12 years publicly declare his mistress more valuable than his wife. But he wasn't finished. "I have a gift," Ruggiero said, gesturing to one of his men, who carried forward a velvet box. "Something traditional, something symbolic. A gift that represents the transfer of favor, of affection, of—" He opened the box. Inside lay a pair of antique silver scissors, their handles carved with the Falcone family crest. For a moment no one understood. Then Ruggiero turned to his wife. "Your hair," he said, as if asking her to pass the salt. "Your grandmother always said a woman's hair was her crown. I think it's time to pass that crown to someone who deserves it." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the candles seemed to stop flickering. Ginevra stared at her husband, searching his steel-gray eyes for some hint of madness, of intoxication, of anything that might explain what he was asking her to do. She found only cold certainty. He believed he had the right. He believed his power gave him permission. He believed she would simply bow her head and let him take what he wanted because she had always let him take what he wanted. And perhaps, she realized with a clarity that felt like ice water in her veins, perhaps he was right. She had let him. For 12 years, she had let him take her youth, her dreams, her identity. She had let him parade his mistress through their home while she pretended not to see. She had let him reduce her to an ornament, a symbol, a beautiful silent thing that existed only to make him look strong. She had let him because she believed her love could save him. She had let him because she believed someday he would remember who he used to be. She had let him because leaving would have meant admitting that she had wasted the best years of her life on a man who was incapable of loving her the way she deserved to be loved. But there, in that ballroom, with 300 witnesses and a pair of silver scissors and a mistress who couldn't quite hide her triumphant smile, Ginevra finally stopped letting him. "Very well," she said, and her voice didn't waver. She reached up and gathered her long chestnut hair over one shoulder, presenting it to her husband like a final offering. He smiled. He actually smiled. And then he cut. The scissors made a sound like a small death, a crisp, final severing that echoed through the silent ballroom. A thick lock of hair fell to the marble floor. Ruggiero gathered it, tied it with a ribbon one of his men provided, and presented it to Bianca with a bow. "For you," he said, "a symbol of my devotion." Bianca accepted it with tears in her eyes, tears of joy, of victory, of the absolute conviction that she had finally won. But she wasn't watching Ginevra. No one was watching Ginevra. And so no one saw the moment the light in those hazel eyes went quiet and still, not with defeat, but with decision. Ginevra knelt. The movement was so graceful, so unhurried, that for a moment the guests thought she might be overwhelmed, might be collapsing. Instead, she simply gathered the strands of her own hair from the cold marble floor, every last one, and rose with the kind of dignity that made the most powerful men in that room feel suddenly small. She looked at her husband, not with hatred, not with tears, not with the desperate plea of a woman begging to be loved. She looked at him with something far more devastating. Pity. "Thank you," she said softly, "for finally setting me free." And then Ginevra de Luca, wife of Ruggiero Falcone, silent guardian of his empire, the woman who had spent 12 years protecting him from himself, turned and walked out of the ballroom. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The following morning, Luciana Falcone found her son in his study, nursing a whiskey at 7 in the morning and staring at the antique map of Sicily that hung above his fireplace. He hadn't slept. That much was obvious from the shadows beneath his steel-gray eyes and the way his jaw was still tight with tension. "She's gone," Luciana said from the doorway. "Took nothing but her clothes and her grandmother's jewelry. Signed no papers. Made no demands. Simply left." Ruggiero didn't turn. "She'll come back. Will she?" Now he turned, and Luciana saw something in her son's eyes that she hadn't seen in years. Something almost like doubt. "She always comes back," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "She's been angry before, given me the silent treatment, But she knows what leaving would mean. She knows the protection she'd lose. She'll come back when she realizes what she's giving up. Luciana crossed the study, her 71 years of wisdom carrying her with a grace that her son had never inherited. You truly don't understand, do you? She stopped before him, and for a moment she looked not at the feared mob boss but at the little boy who had once clung to her skirts when his father raised his voice. She wasn't staying for your protection, Ruggiero. She was staying for you. She was the only thing standing between you and the man your father was. His jaw tightened. Don't. She managed your finances. She mediated your disputes. She remembered every birthday, every anniversary, every detail about your allies that made them feel valued. She was the reason the Castellani family renewed their shipping agreement last year, because she remembered that Don Castellani's wife was recovering from surgery and sent flowers and a personal note. I have people for that. You have people because she trained them. Luciana's voice hardened. Do you know why Alberto Vescari has been circling your territory for 3 years without making a move? Because Ginevra personally visits his wife every month for tea. Because she convinced Signora Vescari that attacking your family would mean attacking her friend. For the first time, something like uncertainty flickered across Ruggiero's face. That's not. You think you built this empire alone? You built the fear, the violence, the reputation. Luciana shook her head slowly. Ginevra built the loyalty, and you just handed her to your enemies. She turned and walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the frame. Your father cut my hair once, she said quietly. When I was pregnant with you. He was drunk and cruel, and he said the same things you probably told yourself last night. That I was his property. That he had the right. That I should be grateful for the life he gave me. Ruggiero's face went pale. I'm not. I stayed because I had nowhere to go and a child to protect. Ginevra stayed because she loved you. Luciana's voice broke slightly. And you just proved to her that her love meant nothing. That her 12 years of sacrifice meant nothing. That she meant nothing. She left without another word. And Ruggiero, for the first time in 20 years, felt something cold settle in his chest that might have been fear. Across the city, Ginevra sat in a small cafe that she had never entered before, watching the morning light play across the surface of her untouched cappuccino. She had spent the night at a modest hotel, paying cash and using the name Rosa Marchetti, her maternal grandmother's name, and used for so long that no one in Ruggiero's organization would think to search for it. Her phone sat on the table beside her. She had turned it off at midnight and hadn't turned it back on. She knew what the screen would show when she did. Missed calls. Angry texts demanding she come home. Perhaps, if Ruggiero was feeling particularly strategic, a message from Massimo, crafted to sound concerned but designed to remind her of everything she was giving up. She didn't care. For the first time in 12 years, she didn't care about any of it. The woman staring back at her in the cafe window looked different somehow. She had pinned up what remained of her uneven hair, and without the weight of those long chestnut locks, her face seemed more angular, more determined, older perhaps, but also freer. Signora? Are you ready to order breakfast? Ginevra looked up at the young waitress and found herself smiling. A real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. Actually, she said, I'd like directions to the nearest hair salon. And then, she paused, considering. Then I need to make a phone call. The phone call was to her sister in Verona. Elena De Luca had married a banker, lived in a comfortable house with 3 children and a dog, and had spent the past 12 years watching her younger sister disappear into the gilded cage of the Falcone family with growing horror. She answered on the second ring. Ginevra? My God. I saw the news. There are photos everywhere. That bastard, actually. I'm out, Ginevra said simply. I'm finally out, Elena. There was a pause. Then Elena burst into tears. Come to Verona, she managed between sobs. Come home. You can stay as long as you need. Forever if you want. I'll talk to Marco. He has connections. He can help you find work. I don't need help finding work. Something in Ginevra's voice made her sister stop. What do you mean? Ginevra stared out the salon window, watching her reflection transform as the stylist shaped her remaining hair into something elegant and deliberate. A refined shoulder-length cut that made her look like a woman who had chosen change rather than had it forced upon her. "I've been preparing for this day for 3 years," she said quietly. "Since the first night he came home smelling like her perfume and didn't bother to lie about it." "Preparing how?" "I copied files, financial records, account numbers, information about every legitimate business the Falcone family uses to launder money." Ginevra paused. "I wasn't planning to use any of it against him. I just wanted insurance. A way to protect myself if I ever needed to negotiate an exit." Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. "Ginevra, that's dangerous. If he finds out." "He won't find out, because I'm not going to use it against him." Ginevra met her own eyes in the mirror. "I'm just going to stop protecting him from everyone else who wants to." The stylist finished her work, spinning the chair so Ginevra could see the full effect. She looked like a different woman. Or perhaps, she thought, she looked like the woman she had always been underneath. The one who had disappeared into the role of perfect mafia wife so completely that even she had forgotten she existed. "I'll be in Verona by tonight," she told her sister. "But I'm not coming to hide. I'm coming to rebuild." "Rebuild what?" Ginevra smiled at her reflection. "My life." Weeks later, the first cracks appeared. Ruggiero noticed them in small ways at first. The Castellani family's shipping agreement came up for renewal, and Don Castellani, who had been an ally for 15 years, suddenly seemed cold, distant. When Ruggiero reached out directly, his calls went unanswered for 3 days. When they finally spoke, Castellani's voice was polite but firm. "My wife," he said carefully, "was very upset by the events at your anniversary celebration. She and Signora Falcone were close. She feels that your treatment of your wife reflects poorly on your character. My marriage is none of your concern." "Perhaps not, but my wife's feelings are my concern. And she no longer wishes to do business with a man who would humiliate the mother of his children in public." "I don't have children." The pause that followed was heavy with implication. "No," Castellani said finally, "you don't. And perhaps now we understand why Signora Falcone never gave you any." He hung up. The shipping agreement was not renewed. Over the following weeks, other fractures appeared. Small things. A banker who had always been cooperative suddenly requested additional documentation before processing a routine transaction. A police captain who had been on the Falcone payroll for years quietly transferred to another district. A judge who had dismissed dozens of cases against Falcone associates retired unexpectedly. "It's coincidence," Ruggiero said at a meeting with his captains. "People move on. It happens." But Massimo, standing at his right hand as always, knew better. After the meeting, he found Ruggiero alone in the garden where he had proposed to Ginevra 12 years earlier. "It's not coincidence," Massimo said bluntly. "The Castellani family, the banker, the police captain, the judge, they all have one thing in common." Ruggiero's jaw tightened. "Don't. Your wife. They were all loyal to your wife. She was the one who remembered their birthdays, who sent gifts when their children graduated, who visited their wives when they were ill." Massimo's weathered face was grim. "She was the connective tissue holding your alliances together. And you cut her away. She'll come back. She filed for divorce 3 days ago." The words hit Ruggiero like a blow to the chest. "What?" "Filed in Verona, where her sister lives. She's claiming no assets, making no financial demands. She just wants out." Massimo paused. Clean, quiet, as if the last 12 years never happened. "She can't. She can. And she is." Massimo stepped closer, his voice dropping. "This is your last chance, Ruggiero. Go to her. Apologize. Beg if you have to, because I've been watching your empire for 20 years. And I'm telling you, she was the foundation. Without her, the whole thing is going to crumble." Ruggiero's steel-gray eyes hardened. "I don't beg." "Then you're a fool." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Ruggiero turned away, his tattooed hands clenched into fists at his sides. "The foundation of my empire is fear," he said coldly. "Not some woman's tea parties and birthday cards. I built this with blood and strength. I don't need her." Massimo shook his head slowly. "You're wrong," he said. "You've always been wrong about that. But by the time you realize it, I'm afraid it will be too late." He left Ruggiero alone in the garden. And somewhere in Verona, completely unaware of the conversation taking place in her former home, Ginevra De Luca signed a lease on a small apartment, accepted a consulting position with a legitimate import-export company that had been eager to hire someone with her organizational skills and connections, and began the slow, deliberate process of building a life that belonged entirely to her. She didn't think about Ruggiero. She didn't wonder if he missed her. She simply got up each morning, put on her new sophisticated business attire, looked at her refined shoulder-length hair in the mirror, and reminded herself that she had survived the worst night of her life with her dignity intact. Everything else would follow. Months passed. The autumn rains gave way to winter snows, and the winter snows melted into the tentative warmth of an Italian spring. In that time, Ginevra flourished. Her position at the import-export company had expanded rapidly. It turned out that years of managing the social and logistical complexities of a mafia empire translated remarkably well into legitimate business. She had an eye for detail, a memory for relationships, and a calm under pressure that made her invaluable during negotiations. By March, she had been promoted twice. By April, she was managing an entire division. Her apartment had grown from sparse and temporary to warm and personal. She had rediscovered old passions, painting watercolors of the Verona skyline, taking long walks along the Adige River, cooking elaborate meals for her sister's family on Sunday evenings. Her nieces adored her. Her brother-in-law respected her. Her sister watched her transformation with tears of joy that she tried to hide but never quite managed. "You're finally you again," Elena said one evening, as they sat on her terrace watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. "The you I remember from before, from when we were girls." Ginevra smiled, tucking a strand of her shoulder-length hair behind her ear. "I forgot who that girl was for a while, but I'm remembering. Do you ever think about him?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "Sometimes," Ginevra admitted, "not with longing, just wondering if he's realized yet, if he understands what he lost. And if he does?" Ginevra's hazel eyes grew distant. "Then I hope he uses that understanding to become better. But not for me." She shook her head slowly. "That door closed the moment those scissors touched my hair. Whatever man he becomes now, it won't be for me. It will be for himself. And that's the only kind of change that matters." Elena reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. "I'm proud of you. I'm proud of me too." They watched the last light fade from the sky in comfortable silence. Neither of them knew that 500 kilometers away, in the grand estate that had once been Ginevra's prison, everything was falling apart. The first major blow came in May. Ruggiero was in a meeting with his financial advisors when the news arrived. One of the offshore accounts that held a significant portion of the Falcone family's liquid assets had been frozen by international authorities. Frozen. His voice was deceptively calm. "On what grounds?" The advisor swallowed hard. "Suspicion of money laundering. Someone filed a detailed report with the Banking Regulatory Authority. They had account numbers, transaction records, shell company structures. Someone." Ruggiero's steel-gray eyes were cold enough to freeze blood. "Who?" "We don't know." The report was filed anonymously. Ruggiero's tattooed knuckles whitened against the edge of his desk. Anonymous, but not unknown. Only a handful of people had access to the kind of information necessary to file that report. His inner circle, his accountants, his lawyers, his wife. "Find out who did this," he said quietly, "and bring them to me." But even as his men scattered to obey, Ruggiero felt a chill of uncertainty that he hadn't experienced in decades. Because deep down, in a part of himself he refused to acknowledge, he already knew. The woman he had humiliated wasn't destroying him. She had simply stopped protecting him. And all the enemies she had held at bay for 12 years were finally circling. Across Sicily, Alberto Vescari smiled. The rival mob boss sat in his study, a glass of aged whiskey in one hand and a dossier in the other. The dossier contained detailed information about the Falcone family's weaknesses, fractured alliances, frozen accounts, departing personnel, and declining influence. "It's remarkable," he said to his lieutenant, "how quickly an empire can crumble when the right stone is removed. Do we move now?" Vescari shook his head slowly, his cold green eyes gleaming with patient anticipation. "Not yet. Let him bleed a little longer. Let him grow desperate." He set down the dossier and steepled his fingers. "Ruggiero Falcone has been untouchable for 20 years because his organization ran like a Swiss watch. Every piece in perfect position. Every ally carefully maintained. Every threat neutralized before it could become dangerous. And now the watchmaker is gone." Vescari smiled. "And the watch is starting to break." He didn't know exactly what role Ginevra de Luca had played in maintaining her husband's empire. He didn't know about the tea parties and birthday cards, the diplomatic visits and personal connections. He only knew that since she left, everything about the Falcone organization had begun to fray, and Alberto Vescari had spent his entire life waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. "Send word to the Rossetti family," he said finally, "and the Marchettis. Tell them that the time has come to discuss redistribution." His lieutenant nodded and departed. And in the gathering darkness of the Sicilian evening, the first moves of what would become a devastating chess game began to take shape. In Verona, Ginevra knew nothing of rival families or redistribution plans. She was sitting in her apartment, reviewing financial projections for her company's expansion into northern European markets, when her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number. "Hello." A pause. Then a voice she hadn't heard in months. Weathered, familiar, and heavy with exhaustion. "Signora Falcone, it's Massimo." Ginevra's hand tightened on the phone. "I'm not Signora Falcone anymore. The divorce was finalized 2 weeks ago." "I know. He paused, and she heard something she had never heard in Massimo Conti's voice before. "Fear. I need to speak with you. In person. It's urgent. If Ruggiero sent you to..." "He didn't send me. He doesn't know I'm calling." Another pause. "And I'm not calling about him. I'm calling about you. About your safety." Something cold slithered down Ginevra's spine. "What do you mean?" "Not over the phone. Please. I can be in Verona by tomorrow morning. There's a cafe on Via Mazzini, Cafe Borsari. Meet me there at 9. Alone." Every instinct Ginevra had developed over 12 years in the Mafia world screamed at her to refuse, to hang up, to pretend this call had never happened and continue building her new life in peaceful ignorance. But Massimo had never lied to her. In all those years, he had been the one person in Ruggiero's organization who had treated her like a human being rather than an accessory. "Tomorrow at 9, she said finally. "But if this is a trick, Massimo..." "It's not. I swear on my mother's grave." He hung up, and Ginevra sat alone in her apartment, staring at the phone in her hand, feeling the fragile peace she had built over the past months begin to tremble. The cafe was crowded with morning commuters when Ginevra arrived, but she spotted Massimo immediately. He sat at a corner table, his scarred eyebrow furrowed with tension, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of espresso that had clearly gone cold. He looked older than she remembered, tired, afraid. "Thank you for coming," he said as she sat across from him. "Tell me." He glanced around the cafe, then leaned closer. 2 weeks ago, someone broke into the Falcone Estate's secondary office. The one where... He paused. The one where certain files were kept. Sensitive files. Ginevra's heart rate accelerated, but she kept her face calm. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Massimo's voice was gentle but firm. "You copied those files years ago. Insurance, you called it. I never said anything because I understood why you did it." He shook his head. "But someone else has copies now too. Someone who didn't get them from you." "How do you know?" "Because the information that's been used against Ruggiero in the past few months, the frozen accounts, the regulatory investigations, the precisely timed departure of key allies, It's too coordinated to be coincidence. Someone has been feeding it to our enemies in a calculated pattern designed to cause maximum damage. Ginevra frowned. You think I... No. Massimo held up a hand. I know you didn't do this. The woman who walked out of that ballroom with dignity wouldn't orchestrate this kind of destruction. You wanted out, not revenge. Then who? Massimo's expression darkened. That's what I've been trying to figure out, and I think I finally have. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded photograph, sliding it across the table. 3 months ago, Bianca Sartori had a meeting in Rome. She told Ruggiero she was visiting her mother. But I had her followed. Ginevra unfolded the photograph. It showed Bianca sitting at an outdoor cafe, her blonde hair catching the Roman sunlight. Across from her sat a man with silver-threaded dark hair and cold green eyes. Alberto Vescari. They've met 6 times since then, Massimo said quietly. Always in different cities. Always in public places where they look like casual acquaintances rather than conspirators. Ginevra stared at the photograph, her mind racing. Bianca is feeding information to Vescari? More than that. Massimo's voice dropped even lower. I've been digging into her background. The woman Ruggiero fell in love with doesn't exist. Her real name is Bianca Montague. Her father was a small-time accountant who worked for the Vescari family 20 years ago before he disappeared. Disappeared. Murdered. By Ruggiero's father. The words landed like stones in still water. Ginevra looked at the photograph again, seeing Bianca's beautiful face with new eyes. She's been playing him from the beginning. For 3 years. Massimo nodded grimly. She got close to him to gather information and wait for the right moment to destroy everything. When you left, when the stability you provided vanished, she started passing everything to Vescari. But why tell me this? Why not tell Ruggiero? Massimo's weathered face was heavy with exhaustion. Because I tried. Last week, I showed him the photograph, laid out everything I'd found. And he... The older man's voice broke slightly. He accused me of being jealous, of trying to drive a wedge between him and the woman who actually loves him. He didn't believe you. He's so blinded by his own pride that he can't see what's right in front of him. Massimo met her eyes. But that's not why I called you here. Then why? Because Vescari isn't just planning to take over Ruggiero's business. He's planning to eliminate the entire bloodline. And you... Massimo swallowed hard. You may be divorced, but you were Signora Falcone for 12 years. You know things. You have connections. You're a loose end. The cold feeling returned, spreading through Ginevra's chest like ice water. He's going to come after me. I intercepted a communication 3 days ago. Vescari has hired contractors. Professional ones. Massimo reached across the table and gripped her hand. You need to disappear, Ginevra. New name, new city, new life. I can help you set it up, but you need to move quickly. Ginevra sat very still, processing everything she had just learned. Her mind raced through possibilities. Run. Disappear. Leave everything she had built in Verona and start over again somewhere else. Or, no. Massimo's eyes widened. What do you mean, no? I mean no. I'm not running. Ginevra straightened her spine, and something in her hazel eyes hardened into steel. I spent 12 years running from problems, avoiding conflicts, pretending everything was fine while my life fell apart around me. I'm not doing that anymore. This isn't a business negotiation. These are killers. I know what they are. She looked down at the photograph still clutched in her hand. But I also know something Vescari doesn't. What? Ginevra's smile was cold and determined. I know every weakness in the Falcone organization. Every secret. Every vulnerability. She looked up at Massimo. Vescari thinks he has the advantage because Bianca fed him information. But Bianca only knows what Ruggiero showed her. She never saw the real inner workings. She never managed the relationships or understood the true power structures. And you did. For 12 years. Ginevra stood, tucking the photograph into her purse. I'm not going to run, Massimo. And I'm not going to stand by while a man I spent half my life with walks blindly into a trap. Even after what he did to you? Ginevra paused, and for a moment the weight of that ballroom night settled over her shoulders like a shroud. The scissors, the falling hair, the triumphant smile on Bianca's face, the absolute certainty in Ruggiero's eyes that he had the right to humiliate her. Even after, she said quietly. Because whatever Ruggiero became, there were good years before Bianca. Years when I genuinely believed in the man he could be. And there are innocent people who work for the Falcone family, people with families, with children, who don't deserve to be destroyed because my ex-husband is too proud to see the truth. She turned and walked toward the cafe door. Ginevra. She paused without turning. What exactly are you planning to do? She looked back over her shoulder, and Massimo saw something in her eyes that he had never seen before. Not the gentle, accommodating wife. Not the dignified woman walking away from humiliation. This was something else entirely. This was the woman who had held a criminal empire together for 12 years through sheer force of intelligence and will. I'm going to save them all, she said simply. And then I'm going to destroy the people who thought they could use me as a pawn. She walked out of the cafe into the bright morning sunlight. And Massimo Conti, who had survived 20 years in one of Italy's most dangerous criminal organizations, felt a chill run down his spine, because he realized, in that moment, that everyone had underestimated Ginevra De Luca, and that mistake was about to cost them dearly. 3 weeks later, Ruggiero Falcone sat alone in his study, staring at financial reports that painted a picture of systematic destruction. The Castellani shipping routes gone. The banking networks in Switzerland frozen. The political connections in Rome evaporated. And now, word had reached him that 3 of his most loyal captains had been approached by Vescari with offers of immunity in exchange for information. 2 had refused. 1 had not. The betrayal burned like acid in his chest. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? His eyes drifted to the photograph on his desk, the only personal item in the entire study. It showed him and Ginevra on their wedding day, young and hopeful, standing in the garden that now seemed to mock him with its emptiness. He hadn't looked at that photograph in years, but lately he found himself drawn to it more and more. There was something in her smile, in the way she looked at him with such complete trust and adoration, that made his chest ache with something he refused to name. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Enter. Bianca swept in, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her blue eyes bright with concern that seemed just slightly rehearsed. Darling, you've been in here for hours. You need to eat something. She moved to stand behind his chair, her hands sliding over his shoulders in a gesture that had once thrilled him but now felt strangely cold. Let me take your mind off all this stress. Ruggiero's tattooed hands tightened on the arms of his chair. Massimo spoke to me last week. Bianca's hands stilled almost imperceptibly. Oh, he showed me a photograph of you in Rome, meeting with Alberto Vescari. For a moment, half a heartbeat, something flickered in Bianca's blue eyes, something cold, something calculating. Then it was gone, replaced by wounded confusion. Massimo is trying to turn you against me. He's always been jealous of what we have. She moved around the chair to face him, kneeling gracefully at his feet. That photograph is a fabrication, or taken out of context. I ran into Vescari at a cafe once, months ago. He was being inappropriate and I left. That's all. Is it? Ruggiero. She reached up to cup his face in her hands. I love you. Everything I've done has been for us, for our future together. You have to believe me. Ruggiero looked into her eyes. He wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her, because if she was lying, then everything Massimo had said was true. And if everything Massimo had said was true, then that meant he had destroyed his marriage, humiliated the woman who loved him most, and lost everything for a lie. His pride couldn't accept that. His pride wouldn't accept that. I believe you, he said. Bianca smiled, and the triumph in her eyes was almost invisible. Almost. That same evening, in a secure location outside Verona, Ginevra sat across a table from 3 people she had never expected to work with again. The first was Massimo, his weathered face grim but determined. The second was Luciana Falcone, Ruggiero's mother, whose wise old eyes still carried the warmth she had always shown her former daughter-in-law. The third was a surprise. Don Castellani himself. Ginevra. The older man inclined his head with genuine respect. When Signora Falcone contacted me, I must admit I was skeptical. But after everything she's explained, he shook his head slowly. Vescari has been manipulating all of us. The intelligence he used to turn me against Ruggiero, it came from someone inside. Someone who knew exactly which buttons to push. Bianca Sartori, Ginevra said. Or Bianca Montague, the daughter of a man Ruggiero's father killed. Castellani's expression darkened. This was never just business. This is a vendetta, and Vescari is using it to take everything. Luciana leaned forward, her gnarled hands clasped together. My son is blind. He refuses to see the truth about that woman. But he's not evil, Ginevra. He's not his father. He's just... She struggled for the words. He's just lost. He's been lost for years, and I don't know how to reach him anymore. Ginevra looked at the woman who had always treated her like a daughter. I'm not doing this for Ruggiero, she said quietly. He made his choices. He has to live with them. But there are hundreds of people who depend on the Falcone organization for their livelihoods. Families, children, people who had nothing to do with what happened in that ballroom. And they'll all be destroyed when Vescari makes his move, Massimo said. His plan isn't just to take over the businesses. He wants to make an example. A massacre that will establish his dominance over all of southern Italy. Ginevra felt the weight of 3 expectant gazes settle on her shoulders. I have a plan, she said, but it will require all of us to trust each other completely. And it will require one thing that I'm not sure any of you can give me. Name it, Castellani said. Ginevra met his eyes. When this is over, when Vescari is exposed and his conspiracy is destroyed, Ruggiero needs to face the consequences of what he's done. Not from me, not from anyone who loved him, but from himself. She paused. He needs to lose everything he thought defined him. His power, his pride, his certainty that he's always right. Only then will he have any chance of becoming the man he was supposed to be. Luciana's eyes filled with tears. You want to save him by letting him fall? I want to give him the opportunity to save himself. Ginevra's voice was soft but unwavering. That's more than he ever gave me. The room fell silent. Then, one by one, they nodded. And the true game began. The following week, Ginevra returned to Sicily. She didn't announce her arrival. She didn't contact Ruggiero or anyone in his inner circle. She simply rented a small villa on the outskirts of Palermo and began, methodically and quietly, to set her plan in motion. The first step was reaching out to the people Bianca had alienated. Servants who had been dismissed for minor infractions. Associates who had been pushed aside when Bianca wanted more influence. Business partners who had watched Ruggiero's cruelty toward his wife and quietly lost respect for him. One by one, Ginevra reminded them that she had never forgotten them. That she had sent birthday cards and holiday gifts even after she left. That she still cared about their families, their children, their struggles. She didn't ask them to betray Ruggiero. She simply rebuilt the connections he had severed. The second step was gathering intelligence. Through Massimo, she obtained detailed information about Vescari's plans, the timing of his intended strike, the captains he had already corrupted, the weak points in the Falcone security. Through Castellani, she accessed financial networks that could trace Vescari's illegal transactions. Through Luciana, she learned which family members could be trusted and which had already been approached by enemies. The picture that emerged was devastating. Vescari planned to move in 3 months, during the annual gathering of Sicilian families that Ruggiero always hosted at his estate. It would be symbolic, poetic, a massacre at the same venue where he had humiliated his wife. But now, thanks to Ginevra, it would be something else entirely. A trap. Not for Ruggiero, for Vescari. 2 months into her plan, Ginevra received an unexpected visitor. She was sitting on the terrace of her rented villa, watching the sun set over the Mediterranean, when a car pulled up the winding driveway. The figure that emerged made her heart stop. Ruggiero. He looked different than she remembered. Thinner. The shadows beneath his steel-gray eyes were darker, and there was a tension in his broad shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights and constant vigilance. But his tattoos were still visible. The Italian script on his neck, the crowned lion on his right forearm, the cathedral and olive branches on his left. Il potere senza amore è vuoto. Power without love is empty. She wondered if he finally understood what those words meant. He stopped at the base of her terrace steps, his tattooed hands hanging uncertainly at his sides. I didn't know you were back in Sicily. I didn't tell anyone. She remained seated, watching him with careful neutrality. How did you find me? Massimo. His jaw tightened. He told me everything. About Bianca. About Vescari. About. He paused, struggling with words that had never come easily to him. About what you've been doing. The alliances you've been rebuilding. The intelligence you've been gathering. And I. He took a breath. I didn't believe him. Not at first. Even after he showed me the photographs, the financial records, the communications between Bianca and Vescari, I couldn't accept that I had been so foolish. Yes, the words seemed to cost him something. Ruggiero Falcone had never admitted to being a fool in his life. So you believe him now? I confronted Bianca 2 days ago, with all the evidence. His voice was rough, ragged. She didn't even try to deny it. She just laughed, said I deserved everything that was coming to me. Said her only regret was that she wouldn't be the one to pull the trigger. Where is she now? Gone. Disappeared. Probably back to Vescari. Ginevra nodded slowly. Then you understand that he's coming for you. I understand that I'm going to lose everything. Ruggiero's steel-gray eyes met hers, and she saw something there she had never seen before. Not pride. Not power. Not the cold certainty of a man who believed he was untouchable. Vulnerability, fear, regret. But I didn't come here to talk about Vescari, he said quietly. I came here to... He stopped. To what? To apologize. The words came out strangled, as if he was choking on them. For what I did to you, in front of everyone, with the scissors, with... He broke off, his tattooed hands clenching into fists. I've been trying to find the words for weeks, the right thing to say. Something that would fix it? Something that would show you I understand what I did. Ginevra rose from her chair. Slowly, she descended the terrace steps until she stood directly in front of him. Close enough to see the lines of exhaustion carved around his eyes. Close enough to smell the familiar scent of his cologne, unchanged after all these months. Close enough to see the way his breath caught when she reached up and touched the Italian script tattooed on his neck. These words, she said softly. Power without love is empty. Do you finally understand what they mean? His throat worked. I think I'm starting to. Tell me. I thought power meant control. Making people do what I wanted. Having the final word. He swallowed hard. But power without love. It's just tyranny. It's just fear. And fear doesn't inspire loyalty. It inspires waiting. Waiting for what? For the moment of weakness. The moment when the tyrant can finally be destroyed. Ginevra nodded. And what about love? Love is... He struggled, his steel-gray eyes searching hers. Love is what makes people stay when they don't have to. What makes them protect you when you're vulnerable. What makes them? What makes them what, Ruggiero? What makes them keep your secrets when exposing them would be so easy? His voice broke. You could have destroyed me, Ginevra. After what I did to you, you had every weapon you needed. But instead you just left. You walked away with nothing but your dignity. And I didn't even realize that your leaving was the worst punishment of all. Because it forced me to see what I had lost. Not my empire. Not my power. His voice dropped to a whisper. I lost you. The only person who ever loved me for who I actually was. Ginevra's hazel eyes were steady, unreadable. An apology isn't enough, she said finally. Words aren't enough. You humiliated me in front of 300 people and then spent months refusing to believe you had done anything wrong. You chose your mistress, a woman you didn't even know was lying to you, over everyone who tried to tell you the truth. I know. Then what are you asking me for? Ruggiero's shoulders slumped. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. He met her eyes with a rawness that made her chest ache despite everything. I'm just asking for the chance to prove that I can be different, that I can learn, that the man you saw in me once, the one who was worth loving, isn't completely gone. Ginevra was silent for a long moment. The Mediterranean breeze stirred her shoulder-length hair, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell told the evening hour. Vescary is coming for you in 3 weeks, she said finally. During the annual gathering at your estate. He plans to kill everyone and take everything. Ruggiero's expression hardened into the familiar mask of the mob boss. But she held up a hand. I have a plan. Massimo has a plan. Castellani, your mother, and a dozen other allies who never stopped believing in the Falcone family. They all have a plan. But it requires you to do something you've never done in your life. What? Ginevra's eyes met his. Trust us. Completely. Without questioning, without controlling, without demanding explanations for every decision. She paused. Can you do that? The struggle on Ruggiero's face was visible. Control was everything to him. Surrender was death. But as he looked at the woman he had wronged, the woman who had every reason to hate him but had chosen instead to save him, something in his chest finally cracked open. Yes, he said hoarsely. I can do that. Ginevra nodded once. Then we have work to do. She turned and walked back up the terrace steps, and Ruggiero followed. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of planning, coordination, and carefully concealed preparation. Ginevra worked tirelessly, coordinating between Massimo's security team, Castellani's network, and Luciana's family connections. She barely slept. She barely ate. Every moment was dedicated to the intricate web of the plan. And through it all, Ruggiero watched her. He watched the way she commanded respect without raising her voice. He watched the way his most hardened captains deferred to her judgment. He watched the way she remembered every detail about every person she spoke to. Their children's names, their birthdays, their concerns and fears. He watched, and he finally understood what Massimo had tried to tell him months ago. She had been the foundation. She had always been the foundation. And he had been too blind to see it. The night before the annual gathering, Ruggiero found Ginevra alone in the garden where he had proposed to her 13 years ago. The moonlight caught the silver streak in her shoulder-length hair, a new addition since he had last seen her, probably caused by the stress of the past months. He thought it made her look like a warrior. You should be sleeping, he said quietly. So should you. He moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Are you afraid? About tomorrow? She considered the question. I'm not afraid of Vescary, or his men. She looked up at the stars scattered across the velvet sky. I'm afraid of what happens after. After we win? If we win. She turned to face him, and in the moonlight, her hazel eyes were luminous. I've been so focused on stopping Vescary that I haven't let myself think about what comes next. Whether you'll actually change. Whether this was all just a temporary crisis that will pass? Yes. Ruggiero's tattooed hands flexed at his sides. I can't promise you I'll be perfect. I've spent 41 years being who I am. That doesn't change overnight. He turned to face her fully. But I can promise you that I'll try. Every single day for the rest of my life. To be the man you believed I could be. Even if it takes years? Even if it takes forever. Ginevra searched his eyes, looking for deception, for manipulation, for the cold calculation that had defined him for so long. She found only sincerity and fear. Tomorrow, she said softly, everything changes. Whatever happens in that ballroom, whatever Vescary throws at us, we face it together. And then, she reached up and touched the tattooed script on his neck one more time. And then we see if you can finally become the man these words were meant to describe. She walked away, leaving him alone in the moonlight. And Ruggiero stood there for a long time, his heart hammering against his ribs, knowing that everything he had left to lose, and everything he might yet gain, would be decided in the next 24 hours. The morning of the gathering dawned clear and warm, the Mediterranean sun flooding the Romano estate with golden light. The same ballroom where Ginevra had been humiliated now gleamed with fresh flowers and polished crystal. The same chandeliers that had illuminated her degradation now sparkled overhead, waiting to witness something far more significant. Guests arrived throughout the morning, representatives from every major family in southern Italy, politicians and bankers and business leaders who had built their fortunes on the foundation of Falcone protection. No one knew what was coming. No one except the handful of people who had spent the past weeks preparing for this moment. Vescari arrived at noon. He walked into the ballroom with the confident stride of a man who believed his victory was already assured. His silver-threaded dark hair was impeccably styled, and his cold green eyes swept the room with barely concealed anticipation. Behind him came his lieutenants, and Bianca Sartori, her blonde hair shimmering in the sunlight, her blue eyes bright with the particular triumph of a woman about to witness the destruction of everything she hated. She didn't know that her communications had been monitored for weeks. She didn't know that the captains Vescari believed he had corrupted had actually been turned back to Falcone loyalty by Ginevra's patient diplomacy. She didn't know that the security guards positioned throughout the ballroom were not Vescari's men, as she believed, but Castellani's people wearing perfect disguises. She didn't know any of it, and by the time she realized the truth, it would be far too late. The confrontation came at the worst possible moment. Ruggiero had just finished his welcoming speech, a carefully scripted address that betrayed nothing of the trap about to spring, when Vescari rose from his seat with a smile that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. "If I may," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom, "I have an announcement of my own." He didn't wait for permission. His lieutenants moved, weapons appearing from beneath their jackets, positioning themselves at strategic points throughout the room. Or at least they tried to. Castellani's disguised guards moved faster. Within seconds, Vescari's men found themselves surrounded, outnumbered, and completely outmaneuvered. Vescari's cold green eyes widened with shock. "What? Did you really think?" Ginevra said, stepping forward from the shadows where she had been waiting. "That you could use a woman's pain as a weapon and not expect her to eventually turn it against you?" The entire ballroom stared. Ginevra looked nothing like the humiliated wife who had walked out of this room a year ago. She stood straight and strong in a tailored burgundy suit, her shoulder-length hair swept back from a face that radiated quiet, devastating power. "You used Bianca to destroy my marriage," she continued, moving closer to Vescari with each word. "You fed her information. You guided her manipulations. You waited for the moment when my husband's cruelty would drive me away and leave his empire vulnerable. And you succeeded." She stopped directly in front of him. "But you made one critical miscalculation. You assumed that because I was humiliated, I was broken. You assumed that because I walked away, I had given up." She smiled, and there was nothing gentle in it. "You assumed that a woman who had been hurt was no longer dangerous." Vescari's cold eyes narrowed. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he hissed. The forces you've assembled are currently being arrested at locations throughout Sicily." Massimo stepped forward, his weathered face grim with satisfaction. "Every safe house, every arms cache, every corrupted official. We've been feeding you false information for weeks while we systematically dismantled your entire operation. And your financial networks," Castellani added, "have been frozen by regulatory authorities who received very detailed documentation about your money laundering activities. Documentation that came from someone who spent 3 years pretending to love you while she gathered evidence." All eyes turned to Bianca. The blonde woman's face had gone pale as bone. "That's not. I didn't." "You played both sides," Ginevra said softly. "You gathered information from Ruggiero, but you also gathered information from Vescari. Insurance, you probably called it. A way to protect yourself no matter who won." She shook her head. "But you forgot something important. I spent 12 years learning how to see the things people try to hide. I knew about your backup files from the moment you created them. Bianca's blue eyes filled with something that might have been fear or hatred. You destroyed me, she spat. You took everything from me. No. Ginevra's voice was quiet but unyielding. I took nothing from you. I simply stopped being the one thing standing between you and the consequences of your own choices. The room fell silent. Then, slowly, Ruggiero stepped forward. He looked at Vescari with eyes that held none of the cold fury she had expected, only a deep, exhausted sorrow. Take them, he said quietly to Massimo. Both of them. Turn them over to the authorities with all the evidence. No violence. No revenge. Just justice. The mob boss who had built his empire on fear was finally learning that true power came from something else entirely. Massimo's men moved to comply, and in the chaos that followed, Ginevra felt a hand close gently over hers. Ruggiero. His steel-gray eyes found hers, and in them she saw something she had almost given up hope of ever seeing again. Humility, gratitude, and the first, fragile glimmers of the man he might yet become. The aftermath of that day stretched into weeks, then months. There were investigations, testimony, the slow, painstaking process of untangling years of corruption and conspiracy. Vescari and Bianca faced trial for a list of charges so extensive that neither would see freedom again. The Falcone organization underwent a transformation that shocked everyone who had known it before. Ruggiero stepped back from day-to-day operations, installing Massimo as temporary head while he focused on what he called reconstruction. Not of his business empire, but of himself. He started therapy. The feared mob boss who had never admitted weakness in his life sat in a quiet office in Palermo and talked about his father's cruelty, his mother's pain, his terror of becoming the monster he had always secretly feared he was. He made amends. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but small, consistent acts of humility. Personal apologies to every person his cruelty had wounded. Financial support for families affected by his organization's activities. Quiet donations to charities that helped domestic violence survivors. And through it all, Ginevra watched. From a distance at first, then closer. 6 months after the confrontation in the ballroom, she agreed to have dinner with him. They met at the small restaurant in Verona where she had rebuilt her life, neutral territory, far from the memories of Sicily. Ruggiero arrived early, his broad shoulders somehow less imposing than she remembered. His steel-gray eyes softened by months of hard internal work. He rose when she entered. "Thank you for coming." She sat across from him, noting the changes time had wrought. The arrogance that had once surrounded him like armor was gone, replaced by something quieter, more human. "You look different," she said. "I feel different." He smiled, and it wasn't the charming smile of a man trying to manipulate. It was uncertain, vulnerable, real. "My therapist says I'm making progress. Learning to separate my identity from my power. Learning to see people as people instead of pieces on a chessboard. That's good. It's terrifying." His tattooed hands wrapped around his water glass. "Every day, I wake up and I don't recognize myself. I spent my whole life being certain of who I was. And now," he shook his head, "now I'm just a man trying to figure out how to be decent. That's not nothing. It's not enough either." His eyes met hers. "Not for what I did to you." Ginevra was quiet for a long moment. "You know that I didn't do any of this for you," she said finally. "Stopping Vescari, protecting the family. None of it was because I wanted you back. I know. I did it because there were innocent people who would have been hurt. Because your mother deserves better than to watch her son's legacy crumble. Because I spent 12 years building something, and even if I walked away from it, I couldn't stand to see it destroyed. I know. So I need you to understand something." She leaned forward, her hazel eyes intent. "I'm not ready to forgive you. I may never be ready to forgive you. What you did in that ballroom in front of everyone, that kind of humiliation doesn't disappear just because you've changed." Ruggiero's face fell, but he nodded. "I understand. But..." She paused, and something in her expression shifted. But I'm willing to see what happens. Not as your wife. Not as anything romantic. Just as two people who share a history, who want to see if something new can be built from the ashes of what was destroyed. Hope flickered in his steel-gray eyes. You mean? I mean we start over. From the beginning. No expectations. No promises. Just honesty. Ruggiero released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. I can do that, he said hoarsely. I can absolutely do that. For the first time since that terrible night, something almost like warmth passed between them. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the first fragile thread of possibility. The following months tested that thread repeatedly. There were setbacks. Days when Ruggiero's old pride surfaced and they fought with the kind of bitter intensity that reminded them both of why they had failed before. There were breakthroughs. Moments of genuine connection. Laughter over shared memories. Quiet conversations that went deeper than either of them had allowed themselves to go in years. But most importantly, there was consistency. Day after day, month after month, Ruggiero showed up. Not with grand gestures or expensive gifts, but with the quiet reliability of a man genuinely committed to change. He remembered the names of her colleagues. He asked about her work with genuine interest. He listened when she talked about her fears and dreams, and he shared his own without trying to control the conversation. He made her laugh, really laugh, for the first time in years. And slowly, so slowly that neither of them could pinpoint the exact moment, the wall around her heart began to crack. 1 year after the confrontation in the ballroom, Ginevra stood in the garden of the Romano estate, the same garden where everything had started. The evening was warm, scented with jasmine and possibility. Ruggiero stood beside her, his tattooed hands steady at his sides, his steel-gray eyes bright with nervous anticipation. I have something for you, he said. Ruggiero, it's not what you think. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Open it. She did. Inside lay a simple silver ring, unadorned except for a single word engraved on its inner surface. Ancora. Again. It's not a wedding ring, he said quickly. It's not a proposal. It's a promise. Commitment to keep trying. To keep learning. To keep becoming the man you believed I could be, no matter how long it takes. Ginevra stared at the ring, her eyes suddenly blurring. Ruggiero. I know I don't deserve another chance. I know that what I did may never fully be forgiven. But I also know that these past months, building something new with you, without expectations or demands, have been the best months of my life. His voice cracked. I just want a chance to keep trying. Whatever that looks like. Whatever you're willing to give. She looked up at him. At the man who had once been her greatest love. At the monster he had become. At the flawed, struggling, genuinely trying human he was learning to be. I'm not ready to be your wife again, she said softly. His face fell. But I might be ready to be your partner. Your equal. Someone who walks beside you instead of behind you. The hope that flooded his steel-gray eyes was almost painful to witness. Really? We start slow. Very slow. And the moment you fall back into old patterns, the moment you try to control me, or humiliate me, or put your pride above my dignity, I walk away. No second chances. I understand. Do you? He took her hands in his tattooed ones, the words honor e lilt visible across his knuckles. Honor and loyalty. I understand, he said, that you are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known, that I nearly destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too blind to see its value. That every day I get to spend trying to earn back your trust is a gift I will never take for granted. Ginevra smiled. It was small, uncertain, but it was real. Then let's begin again. 3 months later, on a quiet hillside overlooking the Tuscan countryside, the same vineyard where they had first met, Ginevra and Ruggiero exchanged new vows. Not the vows of their first wedding, spoken in youth and innocence. These vows were forged in fire. Tempered by betrayal, earned through the slow, difficult work of becoming better. I promise, Ruggiero said, his steel-gray eyes never leaving hers, to protect your dignity as fiercely as I protect my own, to listen when you speak and to hear what you're truly saying. To remember that power without love is empty, and that the greatest strength lies in gentleness. Ginevra's hazel eyes shimmered with tears she didn't try to hide. "I promise," she said, "to give you the grace to keep learning, to call you out when you fall short, but to celebrate how far you've come. To believe in the man you're becoming, while never forgetting the man you were." They exchanged rings in front of a small gathering, just family and their closest friends. Luciana wept with joy. Massimo smiled for the first time in anyone's memory. And as the sun set over the vineyard, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Ruggiero pulled his wife into his arms and held her like she was the most precious thing in his world. Because she was. She always had been. He had just been too blind to see it. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not destruction. It's transformation. It's walking away from someone who hurt you and building a life so beautiful that they realize, on their own, in their own time, exactly what they lost. And if they're lucky enough to earn a second chance, it's watching them become worthy of it. Not through grand gestures, not through dramatic apologies, but through the quiet, consistent, daily choice to be better. That's what Ginevra gave Ruggiero. That's what Ruggiero finally learned to accept. And in the end, that was the greatest love story of all. Not the one that never faced hardship, but the one that walked through fire and emerged, scarred but stronger, into the light. In the years that followed, the Falcone family became something new. Ruggiero gradually transitioned the organization away from its criminal roots, using the legitimacy Ginevra had built to transform it into a genuine business empire. It wasn't easy. Old habits died hard, and there were those who resisted the change. But together they persevered. They had 3 children, a daughter named Elena, after Ginevra's sister, and twin boys named Marco and Lorenzo. They taught their children that real strength was kindness, that real power was service, that love required constant cultivation, like the vineyard where their story had begun. And every year, on their anniversary, Ruggiero would take Ginevra to the garden of the Romano estate and ask her a simple question. "Is it still worth it? Loving me?" And every year, Ginevra would look at the man who had once been her greatest heartbreak, and had become her greatest joy, and give him the same answer. Every single day. Because some stories don't end with revenge. Some stories end with redemption. And the best stories end with both people becoming exactly who they were always meant to be. Not despite the pain, but because of it. The end. Thank you for listening. If the story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one, and your words mean more than you know. Until next time, believe in second chances, but only for those willing to earn them.